Great. So I've been informed we are live, so that's good.
Okay. Give it just another couple of seconds and then we'll get started.
Part D, that's for prescription coverage. It's Part D for drug, and it is required.
Russell, good to go.
Okay, unless there's an objection, it's 12 noon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pam Sebeski. I'm the chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call the TPB September 21st, 2022 meeting to order. I trust everyone has had a good summer and had a nice break and is ready to get back to work. Although the pandemic-related restrictions on large gatherings have largely been lifted, we had previously agreed to conduct a few of our meetings virtually this year. That is why we are conducting this meeting today in a virtual format. Hopefully members find this helpful in managing the many demands on their time, especially as we all come back from our summer break. Also, in keeping with our practice, this meeting is being live streamed on TPB's YouTube channel. While we are all hopefully familiar by now with our virtual meeting procedures, for the benefit of those following the meeting online, I will briefly review the procedures. There may be a few people that hasn't done this with us before. To start the meeting, I will ask staff to start a roll call of members or alternates to document their presence at the meeting and determine if we have a quorum. Then for the action items on the agenda, I will have the presenter complete their briefing, then invite a motion to approve any resolution we plan to adopt and seek a second for the motion made. After the motion has been made and seconded, I will invite questions or comments in turn by jurisdiction before calling for a vote. For the vote, I will seek just the nays and abstentions and take the rest as yes votes. I will call for the votes in turn by jurisdiction. For the informational items, I will have the presenters complete their briefing and then invite questions and comments in turn by jurisdiction. I do want to adhere to the schedule and conclude the meeting on time, so I request all of us to be mindful of the time during our comments and questions. Last, a friendly reminder to mute your microphones always, and importantly, to unmute your mic and state your name and jurisdiction when you do speak. Lynn, if you would, please take a roll call and confirm we have a quorum.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I will announce your jurisdiction, district, or agency, and if you could state your name, I will capture you. I will also be monitoring the participant chat if I go too fast or if you come late. District Council, Ms. Pinto. District Council, Charles Allen.
Here.
Thanks. District Council, Ms. Henderson.
Here.
Thank you. District
I
Office
can't
of
hear you,
Planning.
Lynn.
Can everyone else hear me?
Yes.
Okay. District Office of Planning.
Rebecca Schwartzman.
Thanks. District Department of Transportation.
Leslie Rupert. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Thanks. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie.
Maddie Pizzerto, present.
Charles County.
Ruben Collins, present.
Thank you. College Park. Frederick County.
Mark Missler, present. County Executive Gardner will not be here today.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting us know. City of Frederick. I saw Kelly. City of Gaithersburg. Mr. Neal, I'll keep an eye out. City of Greenbelt.
Rodney Roberts, City Council
Thanks,
member.
Rodney.
I'm here.
Thank you. City of Laurel.
Brian Lee is here, and could you put my name back in? It's blank. You have my extension, but not my name.
Okay, great. We will do that.
Thank you.
Montgomery County Executive. Harry's not here. We'll check. We'll keep an eye out. Montgomery County Legislative.
Office of Council Member Evan Glass is here.
Thank you. Prince George's County Executive.
Victor Weisberg is here.
Thanks, Vic. Prince George's County Legislative. Chris Taveras. Okay. City of Rockville.
Present.
Thank you. Tacoma Park.
Casey Costiga's here.
Thank you. Maryland House of Delegates. Maryland Senate. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Earl is here.
Sorry, I missed
Earl.
Maryland House. Mark Corman's here. My apologies.
Oh, thanks.
And I-
Sorry.
and
I'll go back and look too. I got you, Mark.
And I
Okay.
missed Nancy King from the Maryland Senate. I'm here.
Oh, great. Thank you. Gotcha. Okay. Anybody else from Maryland before I move on? Moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria.
Koenig, present.
Thanks. Arlington County.
Takis Carantoni is present.
Thank you. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County. Falls Church.
Dave Snyder for Falls Church.
Thank you. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger, present.
Thanks. Loudoun County.
Krista Dumstad, present.
City of Manassas.
Pam Sabeski, present.
Thank you. Manassas Park.
Jeanette Burchell here.
Thank you. Prince William County.
Victor Angry here.
Thank
This
you.
is Paula Belita, alternate member.
Thanks, Paolo. Virginia House of Delegates. Virginia Senate. Virginia Department of Transportation.
John Lynch is here.
Thanks. WMATA.
Allison Davis is here.
Thanks. Moving on to ex officio, Federal Highway Administration. Federal Transit Administration. National Capital Planning Commission.
Julia Coster is present.
Thanks, Julia. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And National Park Service. All right, again, if I went too fast, there's also, I think, things happening in the chat. I will capture you. Thank you. And we do have a quorum. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Again, so glad to have everyone back and ready to work. Staff has informed me that there were no public comments submitted this month. Okay, as always, we start with the review and adopting the minutes of our July 2022 meeting. I invite a motion to adopt the minutes as provided. Please state your name and jurisdiction as you make the motion.
So moved, Krista Dumstad, Loudoun County.
Is there a second?
Second, Takis Carantoni, Arlington County.
Thank you both. Any corrections or additions to the meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none. For the vote then, nays and abstentions only. Remember to state your name and jurisdiction. We'll start with the District of Columbia. Maryland. Virginia. WMATA or other agencies? Looks like that's a unanimous vote. Okay, so we'll move on to the next thing. We have a written summary of the September 9th meeting from the Technical Committee. I'll recognize now Matt Arcieri, the chair of the Technical Committee. Matt, is there anything from the meeting that you would like to highlight or expand on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So from September 9th, we, of course, review the items that are on your September agenda, and I'd like to highlight the DOT Safe Systems approach that you're about to receive a presentation on was very interesting. So I think the board will find that very informative. And then we also had some additional items for information and discussion, starting to talk about the Visualize 2045 and 2024 plan update, updates on the Round 10 cooperative forecast, and a proposed greenhouse gas rule at the federal level. So we received those as informational items. With that, though, I stand ready to answer any questions.
All right. Are there any questions for Matt from Maryland? The district? Virginia? WMATA or other agencies? Great. Thank you, Matt. Moving along.
Thank you, Chair.
We have two reports under Community Advisory Committee reports and access for all advisory committee reports. We will start with the Community Advisory Committee. We have a written summary of the September 15th meeting. I now recognize Ashley Hudson, chair of the committee. Ashley, is there anything from the meeting that you would like to highlight or expand on?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Hello, everyone. The Community Advisory Committee to the TPB met on Thursday, September 15th for an online-only meeting. We were joined by representatives from each of our group's DOTs. The intent for this session was to educate the committee on DOT coordination with the MPO process and to form relationships between CAC members and the DOTs. The meeting began with brief presentations from each of the DOT representatives. We had Amir Shapar from VDOT, Kari Snyder from MDOT, and Sam Brooks from DDOT. All three spoke about the multifaceted ways in which their agencies coordinate with the TPB. They described the importance of working with the TPB to ensure compliance with federal planning regulations, including longstanding air conformity requirements, as well as more recent regulations such as performance-based planning and programming. While we are all here working together to enhance regional infrastructure, I found the differences in the state processes very interesting. For example, I learned that Maryland puts a lot of weight in public opinion because when asked if the DOTs are planning for another river crossing, Ms. Snyder shared that the citizens of a particular Maryland county are not in favor of a bridge, so therefore the entire region and East Coast will not get a bridge. One CAC member noted how the population has increased 3 to 4 times since the last river crossing was constructed, and that when local interests outweigh regional interests, the community, and in this case, the entire East Coast, does not benefit. We then separated into breakout groups, one for Virginia and one for Maryland and DC. We focused on effective engagement between the public and the DOTs. Everyone agreed that online meetings maximize participation, but that in-person conversation is invaluable. And CAC members noted that participating in long-range planning is more complicated than project-focused conversations. But Sam Brooks from DDOT assured folks that more than 10,000 people have recently participated in their recent Move DC survey. In regards to public hearing and similar public comment forums, DOT representatives said that comments coming from organizations and from multiple people within a community are often more effective than messages from individuals, and that taking the time to pull together comments that represent a community perspective can be worth the effort. Further, they reiterated, each of the DOT representatives said that all public input is valued, considered, and investigated. So after this meeting, I believe CAC members left with a better understanding of how DOT plans and processes fit with MPO plans and processes, and with new formed relationships with their respective DOT. This concludes my summary, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you for that. It sounds like it was really interesting, and I think a really great thing for that group, having met with them myself earlier. The more knowledge that you all have, the better advice you all can give back to those of us here at the TPB, because citizen input really does matter, I think, to all of us, though it can't be the only factor, as you all clearly stated. So that's great. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Ashley? I'll start with Virginia. Maryland. District. WMATA, other agency. Right. Thank you, Ashley. Now to the report from our Access for All Advisory Committee. I'll turn to our colleague, Kanika Gary, who chairs the committee. We have a written report. Kanik, anything you would like to highlight for us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick highlights. So we met on September 2nd, and we had a review of the National Capital Planning Commission's Pennsylvania Avenue Initiative, which is really exciting. They're really trying to activate the area more, make it accessible to all users, if you will. So the committee was definitely giving input into existing conditions of the avenue, the impact it has on persons with disabilities, also requesting consideration around accessibility for certain populations. So once this new design comes to fruition, that it's truly accessible to all, right? So definitely gonna stay engaged with this process as part of the AFA, and utilizing the AFA to be able to reach out to other members across the DMV and the disability and aging community to make sure that all these kind of uses are taken into consideration. But overall, the plan was looking really great, trying to put in some more greenery, utilization changes a little bit more to be able to have concerts or just programming and arts and creating space where people really want to come and enjoy. So it was really exciting to take a look at that, and definitely check it out if you get a chance. The other item, we had an update on the equity emphasis areas, which is part of the environmental justice analysis phase 1. Our own Sergio Ritaco was able to give us an update. Basically, there was an increase of overall census tracts, but the areas that we looked at originally, for the most part, remained the same. So the analysis that we were using is basically consistent with what we're seeing currently in the region. And part of the discussion was, how are we utilizing this across the DMV? Are jurisdictions using this to do planning? Are jurisdictions using this to justify certain projects? So we had a couple of different examples that we try to use, but of course, the equity emphasis areas are just informational. It's not a mandate that any jurisdiction has to do something in a certain way. It's more so just so that the information is there, not only for us as elected officials, but also for our constituents. So if they wanted to come and bring up issues before our independent bodies, then they would be able to do so. So if you haven't looked at the equity emphasis area tools, highly recommend it. It has really nice maps and overlays that you could see different issues that are going on within your own localities. And the last thing, we also got a quick briefing on the regional bicycle and pedestrian planning for the National Capital Region. Not too much discussion around there, but always good to get an update on it to see that everyone who's walking, biking, rolling, strolling, that everybody's kind of taken into consideration. And the last thing that I'll mention, Madam Chair, we actually only have one more meeting left for this year, and it will be in December on, well, if I can find the date here. On December 16th. That'll be our last AFA committee meeting for the year. And with that, that's the conclusion of my report.
Thank you. Quite informative. Lots of information. Really appreciate all your work on that committee, Kanik. Does anyone have any questions for Kanik? I'll start with Virginia, Maryland, District, WMATA, and other agencies. All right, Kanik, thank you so much. Moving along, we have a written summary of the September 9th steering committee meeting and the director's report. Conti, is there anything you would like to highlight and anything new to share with the board?
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. You have a copy of my report. There was quite a bit of activity in September, so it's a little bit lengthy, close to 100 pages. So I'm going to quickly give you a brief overview of what's in there so I could draw your attention to a few items. On September 17th, and the steering committee met on September 9th and approved an amendment to the list of Northern Virginia projects that the TPB had previously endorsed, which the Northern Virginia TPB member jurisdictions can submit to Richmond for consideration in state funding, state or federal funding as part of their smart scale. There was one project that had been left out, so that was added back to the list. The second action that the steering committee took was it endorsed the performance targets for roadway safety, air quality measure for the Baltimore MPO. The TPB has set these targets for the TPB planning area. Every MPO should set this for their planning area. But it so happens that there is a small piece of area that the Baltimore MPO is responsible for planning, but it actually is physically in the TPB urbanized area. So we have to mutually work with each other, review each other's targets, and endorse them. That was the action TPB steering committee took on behalf of the board. And finally, the steering committee also approved amendments to the brand new TIP that the TPB adopted in June. And later on, I will report that the good news is that TIP has now been approved, and that is the official TIP now. So there were amendments from DC, from WMATA, and from Virginia DOT. Now, under the letter sent and received, we sent a letter to WMATA requesting them to provide their contributions to the regional Street Smart Safety Campaign. WMATA has been providing funds every year for a long time, and this is more of a formal request. We anticipate getting those funds from WMATA this year as well. And a few items from the other updates and announcements. First, the good news that I mentioned, the federal agencies have approved the regional air quality conformity analysis for our updated long-range transportation plan and TIP. So this is the 2022 Visualize 2045 that you all approved and adopted in June. This is one of the earliest such approvals on a quadrennial update. We submitted the document to the feds in late June, and we got the approval in August. I see Sandra Jackson, our federal highway partner and representative, is on the call today. I really appreciate the federal review and the coordination that she helped, because this document needs the review of EPA and a bunch of other agencies. So I appreciate getting this back to us so quickly. We now have a new 4-year clock, meaning the 2022 plan that we adopted does not have to be updated before 2026. And one of the special things about this plan is the voluntary inclusion of climate change, greenhouse gas reduction goals and strategies. But of course, the TPB has already advised staff not to wait till 2026, but rather to do another update in 2024 in light of various changes that's happening. So we will update our plan before 2026, but we do have more time with that. And the second point I would like to bring your attention to is it's interesting that the federal government has now proposed adding greenhouse gas reduction, specifically carbon dioxide emissions reductions, into the MPO's planning process. They have just proposed this. They are seeking comments on it. Of course, the TPB already did it. We did it after an 18-month study of what will it take, how would we go about, and developing a consensus. Staff has drafted a letter to the public docket, to the federal docket. The gist of our comments is that the TPB supports establishing these targets as part of the MPO's performance-based planning and programming process. There were a few technical items that we felt was worth pointing out to them. For example, they had a deadline for establishing the targets, which was earlier than when the comments were due. So I said, well, you may want to take a look at that. They had also suggested establishing targets on an urbanized area process rather than the MPO planning area process. So we have commented maybe you ought to consider that. The one key thing I would note is the federal proposal for establishing these targets are different from the TPB's goals in a couple of important ways. The TPB goals are for all types of greenhouse gases. The federal proposal is only for carbon dioxide, right? So methane or other kinds of greenhouse gases are not what the feds are asking MPOs to set. The second thing is the TPB goals was for all roadways, for all vehicles, whether it's a transit bus or a single occupant vehicle. It was all encompassing. The federal proposal is it will only be carbon dioxide emissions coming out of the tailpipe of vehicles operating on the national highway system. So it's very specific. It's a subset of what TPB has adopted. So we have suggested maybe you ought to consider requiring a broad-based adoption such as what TPB has done. So hopefully members will find staff comments consistent with what the board has been doing and its stated positions. But your comments on the draft comment letter are welcome. We have not yet submitted the comment letter. You have about a week's time to let me know if you would like any changes, and we would be happy to consider that. The third item I would like to draw your attention to, still on the climate topic, The COG board at its meeting last week adopted a resolution to establish a regional electric vehicle deployment working group and also to set up an electric vehicle deployment clearinghouse for the entire region. I believe this will be very beneficial. This will provide every member of the TPB and their staffs with an opportunity to coordinate actions that other member jurisdictions, other agencies are taking in this regard to help learn from each other, and equally importantly, to collaborate. If two or more jurisdictions want to combine forces to do something, then this would be an opportunity. And one of the things that would be critical is there is significant amount of federal funding being made available for EV deployment to the tune of about $7.5 billion in the next 5 years. And a lot of that money is available on a competitive grant. So if there is interest in the TPB member jurisdictions and agencies to come together and apply for a regional federal grant, then this working group can be the forum where such discussions and efforts are undertaken. So that's good news. COG staff will be looking at how to convene this working group. I am very confident that this working group will hear from local staffs, state staffs, from the representatives of the private sector, whether it is from the energy sector or whether it is from the automobile sector. We are also looking to have federal agencies such as the GSA come and work with the working group. So it will be an all-inclusive group. There's more to come. I will have more information once COG staff begin to develop the outline for this working group. Last couple items, a reminder that tomorrow, September 22nd, is the Regional Car Free Day. If you have registered already, great, you might win a prize. If not, you still have time to register, so you can win a prize. Lastly, we received an email update from Maryland Department of Transportation about their Maryland Express Lanes project. You will remember that they had made a commitment to the TPB that every few months they will provide us with an update. So we received an update from them. We received the update after the meeting materials were mailed out. We'll be posting their update to the TPB page today. But I see Earl Lewis from MDOT is here. I'm happy to recognize him to see if he would like to say anything on the latest update on this project.
Sure, thanks, Conti. So again, as you mentioned, pursuant to the requirement in TPB Resolution R15 2022, provide the board with an update on the status of the Op Lanes Maryland project and transit investments. We wanted to let you know that on August 25th, MDOT SHA and Federal Highway announced the approval of the record of decision for the I-495 and I-270 managed lane study. Approval of the ROD marks a final milestone in the National Environmental Policy Act process that spanned more than 4 years and included 16 public workshops and 7 public hearings with extended public comment periods. The transit commitments made to Montgomery County and the TPB were included in the ROD and tied to project delivery under a P3 contractual agreement with the developer, Accelerate Maryland Partners. The next step is the Section P3 agreement approval at the Maryland Board of Public Works and financial close of the project, which is not scheduled at this time. Obviously, you can get more information on the ROD and the fees at our Op Lanes website. There's also a link to the press release there. That'll be part of what Conti sends to everyone. I can tell you in the ROD, the mentioning of the transit aspects of the project are between page 12 and 15. It also discusses bicycle and pedestrian improvements that also been committed to as part of the project. So I would say take a look, and you can verify that it's all in there as has been committed to and been agreed to with TPB. So thanks.
Thank you, Chair. That concludes my remarks. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Conti. Thank you, Earl. Are there questions? We'll start with the district. Maryland, Virginia, Ramada, or other agencies?
All right, Chair Betsky, I don't know if you saw my hand.
No, I didn't see it, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is Casey from Tacoma Park. I just had two items, and thank you for the very substantive updates. One question related to the proposed federal rule on the GHG emissions, which I think is really exciting to see being proposed. And I think it makes a lot of sense that the states would not have to submit the targets before the deadline for the rule being put into place. But I was curious if you could speak a little bit to why the recommendation suggested the 6 to 9 months afterwards, and if there's any possibility that you think it might be feasible to do something that might be a little bit shorter than that, just recognizing kind of the urgency of moving forward on those targets. And then my second point was related to the MDOT response with regard to my question at the previous meeting about the TA set-aside projects. I really appreciated getting some more information about the thinking with regard to having not allowing for partial funding of projects. But I did want to kind of follow up on that and ask if MDOT could kind of take a critical look at that and see if there might be a way to rethink it, because from my understanding, both VDOT and DDOT do have the possibility of allowing partial funding. And I know the concern that MDOT raised was that it might leave funds on the table if a project is partially funded and then not able to move forward. But I think we saw in the last cycle that it's also possible to leave money on the table if partial funding is not allowed. So I'd like to see some sort of kind of middle ground there, and maybe looking at some of the ways that other funding cycles work. I think if I recall correctly, maybe one of the AFA grants that I was involved in allowed for an option to indicate partial funding as something that could be requested as an option if a project could still move forward without being fully funded, might be an alternative to look into. So I just wanted to raise that as well. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Mr. Earl Lewis. We can have our planning folks take a look at that and see if there may be a subset of projects that would have criteria or characteristics that would not have the issues that we discussed in our response. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you.
Earl, Conti?
Okay, good. Thanks. The other comment or question Ms. Kostick had related to why do we think we need 6 to 9 months time to establish targets once the rule is finalized? I certainly don't need to remind this board, it took us 24 months to agree on what an aspirational goal would be. So it is a rather involved process, particularly for this state. And the rule as it currently proposes is this be established throughout the state based on urbanized areas. And an urbanized area does not always very neatly comport with boundaries of MPOs or planning districts or what have you. The second thing is the federal requirement is this be only for tailpipes and this be only for vehicles on the national highway system. So there is a lot of data that the states will have to gather to inform their target settings. What is the baseline for this? States such as Maryland, who have been working on climate change for about 8 years now, and have done a lot of work, they have lots of data at the general comprehensive level. But to get a subset of that, they'll need some additional time. And then there is the consultation process itself. So it was just recognizing that if the rule is finalized today, it would be very hard to expect states to establish targets for all urbanized areas within a couple months. So we said, we may want to consider some time. To be fair, in the past, this would be an addition to the existing 6 other requirements under performance-based planning and programming. Later today on the agenda, you will hear from Eric Randall on 2 of those 6 things that we have been working on. In the past, federal agencies have given adequate time for the state DOTs to do what needs to be done, particularly data gathering and data analysis. So we don't expect that it won't happen, but given that there was this confusion about targets have to be set even before the comments on the rule is established, we said, well, just take a relook at the dates. And when you do that, please make sure that that you provide some time.
Okay. Thank you, Conti and Earl. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to assume it's okay to move on to the next item on the agenda. Chairman's comments. I'll reinforce Conti's message earlier about Car-Free Day tomorrow, since we talked about it in July and it's been 2 months for anyone that's doesn't have that on their radar. I'm very glad that we've received the federal approval of the conformity analysis of our updated long-range plan and TIP so swiftly. I also want to note that the federal government has now proposed its intent to add reducing greenhouse gases from the on-road sector as part of the long-range transportation plans. We are here at the TPB have already done that earlier in June after a careful study and consideration of inputs from a variety of stakeholders. It shows that this board is looking ahead and looking for ways to go beyond the federal requirements and developing regional transportation plans. All of you deserve credit for going the extra mile on this, as do our constituents who worked with us on this. I also am glad to hear about the COG Board's resolution on electric vehicle deployment. Our study showed that moving our vehicle fleet off fossil fuel and to clean fuel, including electric, will give us the largest greenhouse reductions. Many of us are already working on it. To now hear that there is a central clearinghouse for actions to build electric vehicle infrastructure and the formation of a regional work group will help us all learn from each other and collaborate in our efforts. Perhaps we can work together and apply for federal grants to install the EV charging stations. I like how the TPB and COG, despite being independent bodies, can partner and work together to advance each other's initiatives. Regional collaboration efforts make this all happen. So with that, we will move on to our first action item, the only action item for today. In July, we released a draft of revisions to our bylaws. We were all encouraged to provide comments. Today, we will review the comments and any changes we wish to make in response. I would like us, if at all possible, to act on this today. Normally, after staff briefing, I would welcome a motion to adopt the resolution and proceed to a vote after discussion on the motion. The resolution for this item is about adopting the revised bylaws document that we have in our packet. I trust we find most of the text acceptable. However, staff has informed us in their memo that there is one comment that potentially would merit revising the text. The comment is about us opting to participate virtually in a meeting that is scheduled as an in-person meeting. The staff memo notes that there are different viewpoints on this, and thus we have options to consider on revising the text. This is something we will need to discuss and see where the board's sentiments lie on this matter. So I will ask Lynn to brief us on the comments and the choices regarding the optional virtual participation. Then we will work to see where our sentiments are before taking up a motion to adopt resolution R2-2023 that is in our packet. So with that, Lynn, please proceed.
Great. Thank you, Chair Sebeski. Here we go. Let's have some fun. All right. So in July, I presented our proposal to update the TPB bylaws. The impetus was to outline the virtual participation procedures available to members and alternates after our public health emergency ends. We also took the opportunity to bring the bylaws up to the 21st century with various minor edits. We asked you for comments, and I followed up with a gentle reminder during our month off, and there's really only one issue remaining. So please keep in mind that the bylaws as drafted address virtual participation already in a couple of ways. So not at issue. The chair and the TPB can designate and pre-schedule up to 3 all virtual meetings per year. Also not an issue, the chair can determine that no electronic participation is permitted for any given meeting. Also not an issue. The chair can determine, the TPB shall give preference for in-person meetings over virtual meetings. Members will be expected to participate in the in-person meetings in person unless exempted per the provisions. And here's the issue. All right, so several members asked for more virtual participation flexibility. So to be clear, the degree of flexibility is the problem we're trying to solve here. So we're going to try something new to figure out where the board's sentiments lie. We are going to try group editing prior to the resolution being placed on the floor. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the options. I'm going to ask if we've missed any, and then we are going to informally poll you via WebEx. So this will not be an official vote, although we can find out who voted. So that's kind of in the background. So voting is super easy and obvious. Like I said, I'm going to go through the questions first. The options were already listed in the memo from last week, so there's nothing new here. They're also available on the meeting page for you to look up yourself. Okay, so how will this logistically work? All WebEx participants will see the actual poll. It'll be on your screen in the right. People on the phone can see them too, although I don't think we have anybody on the phone. So we are asking only the voting TPB members or alternates to vote once the poll has started. So there's 70 people on here right now. We're not expecting 70 answers. We're expecting more, like I didn't do the math, between 20 and 30. So you won't see 70 answers. So meanwhile, you will have, once the poll starts, you have 3 minutes to vote. And again, I'm going through all of these. It shouldn't take us 3 minutes. So once the poll finishes, all WebEx participants will see the responses. They'll see the answers right there. Meanwhile, Leo is going to take those answers. He's going to handwrite them into the screen. So all our viewers on YouTube can also see the results. Okay, so if there are clear results, I will then show you exactly what the text will be in the bylaws that you will be asked to vote on. Just so you know, if you want to go to the meeting page, pull this presentation up, all the text is all in the back of that as well. So I'm literally just scrolling through this presentation. Anyway, once we have the winner, we will scroll to the winning text. I will read the winning text, and then I will ask the chair to put resolution R2-2023, including this text, on the floor for a vote. So again, we're going to group edit this. We'll come up with the most agreed to response, and then the chair will include that in the vote. All right. So here we go. So as you know from reading the memo, we also informally asked around to see what other board members and our member agencies are also doing. So I'll just pepper that into our comments here. And the long story short, there's some variation of these in many of our boards and our partners. And many people haven't actually even started this process. So we're kind of, I think, in the middle here. So here are the options that we will poll you on. So now I'm going to read from the screen. So remember, these are in addition to the provision that the TPB can already schedule up to 100% virtual meetings like the one we're doing today. So our options are really for those who want to opt to participate virtually when an in-person meeting is scheduled. Okay, first, option A, bylaws remain as drafted, which is actually more flexible than what we have today. This option limits optional virtual participation in in-person meetings to 2 times a year. So what that translates to is plus the 3 that the TPB can already schedule, that gives us up to 5 of the 11 meetings that a member can participate in virtually. This option very closely resembles the NVTA's recently updated policy, just to give you an idea of what's going on out there. All right, option B changes the proposed limit from 2 to 4. So that limits optional virtual participation in in-person meetings to up to 4 times a year. So therefore, 4 plus 3 is 7. Potentially 7 of 11 meetings can be virtual participation. Option C replaces limits on 2 optional virtual participations with a requirement for 2 in-person participations. So what that translates to is potentially 9 of 11 meetings can be virtual participation. Lastly, option D, we call maximum flexibility, which means no limits on virtual participation or requirements for in-person participation. This is actually what the COG board just recently approved, just to give you an idea. So as you can see from options A through D, there are varying degrees of added flexibility as what we heard from the comments. All right, so now for the fun, I'm going to turn this back to the chair. Well, she will ask you if there are other options, maybe something we haven't thought about. But a quick recap is that once she's done, we're going to poll you for the board's favorite option. Then I will read what that looks like in the board in the bylaws language, which will be edited in the bylaws prior to you taking action on it. So when you take action on the bylaws, it will have this agreed to language in it. So Madam Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Lynn. That is a fair description of the matter, and I believe the 4 options cover a wide spectrum of things that we could do and that I've heard about. As I said into the July meeting, I truly believe that for this regional body with members from 3 different states, 23 different localities, it really makes a difference when members, many of whom who would likely not have a chance to work together other than when they are on the TPB, come together in person at least once every couple of months. This provides an opportunity for everyone to get to know each other so that they can understand the different priorities and challenges to making this transportation system better and work for everyone. This is very important when we make decisions that affect the entire region. I have concerns that if we agree to change our bylaws saying that board members can participate virtually 100% of the time, that there will be less collaboration, and this will ultimately impact the decisions this board needs to make in a potentially negative way. Yet I do appreciate that there are some who see the other benefits of participating virtually, such as the time commitment for travel to these meetings or from an environmental perspective. I know coming here to the COG building is a considerable time commitment with all the other responsibilities we all have. I should know I work on not only as a nurse the majority of my time, but I also serve as the vice mayor here in the city of Manassas. And I have one of the longest commutes to come to these TPB meetings. The time commitment to come to TPB meetings here at COG has really been beneficial, though, and in that I have come to know so many of you and understand your views so much better than before. And that hasn't happened just obviously in these virtual meetings. It's been the in-person part of being able to talk with people. Yet I know there are different perspectives about this. Keep in mind that as you vote, this is a bylaw change. So it is not about your personal perspective, as this will affect the future. Do you think that those serving on TPB in the future and representing your jurisdiction can be the most effective if they are only ever participating virtually? Will they truly be able to embrace and understand regional collaboration if they're only participating virtually? These are just some thoughts I'd like for you to consider, because if you give the option of only virtual, I know that there are many people who may take that option as the only choice because it is more convenient. That is why I like the idea of doing the straw poll that Lynn has proposed. Given that there are different perspectives on this, I believe it will be useful to get a sense of where most of us are on this. Yet before we take a straw poll, first let me see if any member has any other option to add. We'll have discussions on our thoughts on this once we see what the straw poll shows, but right now we just need to know if you have a thought on an option that's not been proposed here. So I will start, and I know I see that there's some hands up, but I'll ask Mr. Roberts and Mr. Snyder, if your comments are not about proposing a specific option, if you could remove your hand so that we can talk about that first. And then, like I said, after we do the straw poll, this will be open up for full discussion. Okay? All right. I guess we'll start then with Rodney Roberts. His hand went up when Lynn was still talking. So hopefully he has an option he wishes to propose. If not, I will tell you all up front, I'm going to stop the conversation and move on so that we can keep this conversation on track. So Mr. Roberts, with that, I'll let you go ahead.
Mr. Roberts, if you're speaking, you may be on mute.
Okay. I'm going to assume that, maybe he can let us know later or put something in the chat None of us can hear him, right?
Yeah, interestingly, I don't see him on the participants list. I wonder if there was some connection issue. So maybe if there are other questions, maybe we can go and see if Mr. Roberts will rejoin us.
Okay. I mean, it just now went away too. So, okay. So I guess with that, Lynn, do we go now? I'm assuming to the straw poll. Doesn't look like, I'm assuming, since I see no hands, that everyone sees the options that we are looking at here for our
Right.
straw poll, and we're going to start with that.
Great. So Leah's going to change the slide to the actual verbiage. It's going to be in the poll so the folks online can see, and then we're going to start the poll. You'll have 3 minutes. So go for it, Leo. Okay, so the poll is open. So just asking for members and alternates to please vote.
Members should be able to see it in the chat box.
Looks like we have about 2 minutes left. Hopefully you guys have all figured it out. Okay, so I'm going to ask Leo to just end the poll because there's no more coming in. And what he'll do is so just give him a minute to total everything up.
And then we'll all be able to see that on our screen, right? The results.
So you'll see them both. So you'll see on the right side where you did the poll, there will be the results. And on the main part of the screen where the presentation is, Leo will hand enter the same results that you see on the right side. So that way our viewers can see it as well as our WebEx friends. Yeah, so just give them a minute, please. All right, so he basically just said that something locked up, but he's going to write the answers in the WebEx in the main screen. So you'll see him right now. He screen captured it too, so we can show you if you really wanted to see it. All right, so there are your totals. So it looks like bylaws remain as drafted 7, change from 2 to 4, 5, for place limits for 2 virtual with 2 in-person is 8, and maximum flexibility with no limits received 12 votes.
Okay. I'm going to ask Conti. We all can see our straw poll, and it appears to a degree the maximum flexibility might have been, but since B and C are so close and those numbers would actually added together would be higher. It seems to me we probably need to open the floor up for some discussion and see. Find my cursor here. I apologize.
So while I haven't done this yet, I will say one of my staff said there's 32 members present. So just so you know, looks like we heard from everyone.
Which is great. I think that's awesome. Let me close down the chat here. For some reason, I'm not seeing who my participants are. Maybe Lynn, you could help me out. I think that I can see that Brian Lee has a hand up. So let's start with Brian. I'll call him Brian.
Neil Harris, Dave Snyder. So we'll start with Brian because you said his name first, then Neil, then Dave.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you. Having served on several regional collaborative bodies, including Leadership Greater Washington, the Metropolitan Washington Board of Trade, and now this board on more than one occasion for our COG, I think that it is important to have some in-person meetings because we are a deliberative and collaborative body. And those things that you get when you meet and network are invaluable that you can't get online. So I understand that for some it may be a struggle. But I think it is important that we have some in-person meetings. I would only point you to some of the bodies that are dysfunctional around the world because they haven't gotten back together and are able to network in person. So that's my 2 cents comments. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll go to Neil Harris.
All right, thank you. So I think the reason I voted for maximum flexibility is I do recognize the value of attending in person, and I would expect to attend in person whenever possible. And I expect that, knowing the members of this board, that would generally be the feeling. However, I'm just wondering how practical it would be to limit participation virtually. I mean, the question is, what happens if you run out of your passes to participate virtually? Are you not allowed to attend virtually, period? I mean, at all, if you can't make it? So we went through the same conversation at the city of Gaithersburg for our council meetings. And our mayor expressed much of the same concerns that have been raised in terms of the collegiality that comes from meeting in person. But we ended up opting for maximum flexibility just because we didn't want someone to be in the position where they had already attended their entire quota of virtual meetings and therefore were not allowed to attend, or I'm not sure what the penalty would be at that point. So I think flexibility is fine. We're all grown-ups. We all understand the value of collaboration, and hopefully as we go forward, we'll attend whenever possible. Thank you.
Dave Snyder.
Thanks very much. It appears from the vote that there's a large number, if not a majority of those voting, supporting a great deal of flexibility, C and D, as I understand it. And for the reasons that Neil Harris just indicated, I would support him totally. I do have a procedural question, however, because the laws in our different jurisdictions may apply differently. Before we take any action, I think it should be reviewed by municipal attorneys in all 3 jurisdictions to assure that we are not inadvertently stepping on laws that would otherwise apply to us. So thanks much.
Well, since we have Ms. Pandak on the line, do you want to let her address that, Conti?
Yes, I was just trying to recognize Sharon Pandak, who is TPB's legal counsel. Sharon?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and Conti. Mr. Snyder, the issue was actually reviewed. I reviewed it before we even brought to the COG board only issue, and it's not relevant to you in Falls Church, is that when there are more than 2 members from the same jurisdiction coming to a meeting, then there has to be notice given at home because of the requirements. I say the home jurisdiction, the requirements of, just a second. I got a bleep on my picture. So there is not a problem with respect to allowing maximum flexibility under the Virginia FOIA, the Maryland Public Records, or the District Public Meeting and Records Act, because COG is not subject to them. I will add also that at the request of Supervisor Gross of Fairfax County, I discussed that precise issue with her at the time when COG was considering amending the bylaws, and she also reviewed it with her county attorney. I can't speak for your city attorney in Falls Church, but the matter has been reviewed, and I do not think it's an issue.
Thanks very much. I just want to put on the record, Madam Chair.
Sure.
No, thank you. And I know in Virginia, I don't believe that we have the same kind of flexibility that was just discussed
Right.
that's available in Maryland. We have to actually get approval and a vote by the board to participate virtually, and there is a limitation. And I think that's all the Virginia boards that I participate on had to have limitations on virtual participation. But that's not applying to CLOG, and that's not what this is about today. I'll go on to Mayor Rischel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel confident that no matter what this board decides, that we'll all do our very best to accommodate the scheduling. But I think it's helpful to remember that we just passed greenhouse gas reduction goals that were really very robust. And it would seem to me that the maximum flexibility, maximum flexibility would support that previous vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Takis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I initially wanted to cover the same issue with Mr. Snyder, but I wanted also to say that I have the utmost respect for those who come from very far to attend these meetings. This is really a heavy lift in your schedule. You are not less or more occupied like everybody else here, so it's a big deal, especially when the meeting is in the middle of the day and basically it cancels your entire day sometimes. I think that it would help probably to see whether we can move the meetings. I know that's the prerogative of the chair and of COG staff into a place where you know this commuting would be facilitated. I cannot overstate how important. I mean, I'm relatively recently elected, so for me, participating in person is a completely different level of understanding of, you know, diving in and discussing, and this is really very, very important. To Mayor Rischel's point, yes, I mean, I very much hope that we can get to a point where we can do this travel without significant carbon footprint with public transportation, and that should be factored in because this is an additional burden. So I voted for A, but again, I think that this is not. We want to provide flexibility, and I want to ask also. We have alternates, and that's also an additional flexibility that's built in the system, right?
Thank you. Thank you all for all of your comments. Yes, our current bylaws say that we would all be meeting in person. We wouldn't have the option of doing anything virtual except like we did during the pandemic, during the states of emergency type of thing. So any change here is going to change that. We saw that during that time frame. So
Mr. Chair,
I'm kind of at a loss, Conti.
Yeah, if you wish, Lynn can, given that D seems to be the prevailing choice before you take a vote today. Maybe Lynn can show how exactly the text in the resolution document would be modified.
So
And then we
Leo,
can decide whether we want to take a vote today.
Yep. So Leo can pull that up right now. You guys all have access to this. It's posted on our meeting page. So if you go to slide 8, so this is what we would then include into the bylaws as part of the approval if this is the way you guys want to go. So in order to reflect no limits on virtual participation or requirements for in-person participation, staff proposes striking the end of the first sentence, which would mean striking the phrase that has the limit. So the sentence would then read virtual participation in an in-person meeting. When an in-person meeting is scheduled, a member may attend the meeting virtually through electronic communication means from a remote location, period. Then the member wishing to participate virtually shall give at least 3 days notice, on and on and on. So this would be the language we would strike the back end of that sentence, and then the board would be asked to approve the bylaws. Madam Chair.
Okay. So since to me it was a 13-12 because B and C together had 13 votes, D had 12. I think what we need is I'm guessing some kind of motion at this point to see where we want to start the voting at. Does anyone wish to make a motion?
Madam Chair, Dave Snyder, I would move the proposed language that's on our screens now.
Is there a second?
Second from Manassas Park.
And Lynn, I'd like to call for a roll call vote because I think it might be easier than trying to ask for nays and abstentions on this.
Great. We are ready. Are you ready for that?
I am. Hopefully everybody else is. Actually, Kelly Russell, I think, has her hand up. Before we vote, do we want to let her talk?
I just have a question. With
Go
the
ahead.
regard to the 3 days notice, I think that seemed to be inserted because there were going to be separate instances where you were going to have to make different accommodations. Is that necessary? And is there to be any exception to that if something occurs day of and you need to meet virtually?
So there are exceptions. The original language was 5 days notice, so we backed it off to 3, and the chair can accept or deny anything. And actually, the current bylaws say that too. So there is flexibility already written in there, Kelly.
Okay. With that, Lynn, if you'll go forward with the vote, please.
Okay, great. So I will list the jurisdiction, although it's not going to follow along the line that of the membership list. We have just so everyone knows, there are at least 2 other people taking count of the vote alongside me. You won't see them on the screen. I'm going to list your jurisdiction. If you could state your name and state your vote. Yes means yes, you're passing the resolution R2-2023 with the language as from option D. District Council Brooke Pinto.
Yes. Ella Hansen.
Thank you. District Council Charles Allen.
Yes.
District Council Ms. Henderson.
Yes.
District Office of Planning.
Dan Emerine for DC Office of Planning, yes.
Thank you. District Department of Transportation.
Anna Chamberlain. Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie.
Yes. Maddie Pizzerta.
Thank you. Charles County.
Yes. Ruben Collins.
Thank you. College Park.
Patrick Wyan, no.
No, gotcha. Frederick County.
Yes. Mark Mishler.
Yes. Thanks, Mark. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell, yes.
Thank you. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris, yes.
Thank you. City of Greenbelt. So I did see Rodney come back. Is he around? Okay. City of Laurel.
Brian Lee, no.
No. Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Ironridge, yes.
Okay, Gary, I heard yes. Okay.
Yes.
Montgomery County Legislative. Prince George's County Executive.
Victor Weisberg, yes.
Thank you, Vic. Prince George's Legislative. City of Rockville.
Bridget Donald Newton, yes.
Yes, thank you, Bridget. Tacoma Park.
Yes. Casey Kostick.
Casey. Maryland House of Delegates.
Mark Corman, yes.
Yes. Maryland Senate.
Nancy King, yes.
Thank you. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Jeffrey Hirsch, yes.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Moving to Virginia, City of Alexandria.
This is Gannick, nay.
Gotcha. No for Kannick. Arlington County.
Nay, Takis Karantanis.
Could you repeat that, Takis, please?
I voted no.
Voted no. Thank you. Thank you for repeating as well. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County. I think anyone from Fairfax County is here. Falls Church.
Yes.
Thank you, Dave Snyder. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger, yes.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstattd, yes.
And Corinna.
Corinne Sigsbury, yes.
Yes, thank you. City of Manassas.
No.
No, thank you. Manassas Park.
Can you please restate the motion? I have a bad connection.
Great. So the motion is to approve the bylaws that include option D, which is the most flexible option, which is unlimited virtual participation as an option.
Okay, thank you. I vote
yes.
I vote yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jeanette. Prince William County.
Yes.
Was that Mr. Angry?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, Mr. Angry.
Okay, great. And
Paula
then
Doty,
Palo?
yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Virginia House of Delegates. Virginia Senate. Virginia Department of Transportation.
John Lynch, yes.
Yes, thank you. And lastly, WMATA.
Allison Davis, yes.
Yes. Okay, so I believe there were four, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 no votes. The yes votes have it. We'll make sure everybody's recorded in the minutes.
Thank you. With that, I don't think that there's any further conversation, so we can move on to our informational items. We're a little behind schedule, so we'll try to move this as quickly as we are able to do. Now we have our information items. First, we will have Eric Randall on staff brief us on the proposed updates to the performance targets we have previously set for the highway assets and for the highway system performance. These are draft targets. We will be asked to adopt these next month. Eric, take it away.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Hopefully the PowerPoint will be coming up here in a minute. Hopefully you can hear me. So the PowerPoint will be coming up in a moment. What I'm going to brief to you is new draft 4-year targets. So some of you who've been on the board for a long time may remember that back in 2018, we set initial 4-year targets for a couple of performance areas, including highway and pavement condition, which come under the umbrella of highway assets. Here we go. And also highway system performance targets. Now, pretty much all of you are familiar with the other targets we set on an annual basis, including highway safety targets, which actually you'll probably be seeing at the end of the year, highway safety and transit safety. These targets we only do every 4 years, and the PowerPoint seems to have disappeared from my screen again. Hope it'll come back in a minute. So I'm going to discuss today the process that staff have worked with to get to today, recap the proposed measures and how we're developing the targets for the next 4 years, and then end up on next steps. So if I could go to slide 2, please. Screen mode. All right, so again, I'll cover action items, how we got here today, review the methodology, performance forecasts, and the proposed 4-year targets for the 2022 to 2025 period. So again, this is one of the performance periods that is part of the whole PVPP legislation by the federal agencies. and conclude next steps. Next slide, please. So just a reminder for everyone, performance-based planning and programming, this is a federal requirement coming out of MAP 21. FAST Act continues to be a part of surface transportation regulations. State DOTs, MPOs, transit agencies are supposed to transition to performance-driven, outcome-based program to provide increased transparency and accountability, including of federal transportation funds. And also we have to link our investment priorities that we make in our long-range plan and our TIP to the achievement of these performance targets. So a lot of people at state DOTs and us at TPB staff work hard on doing these requirements. Next slide, please. So again, we're setting new targets for new 4-year targets for the 2022 to 2025 period. Obviously, we're already 9 calendar months into 2022. The state DOTs are hard at work because they all have to get reports to the federal agencies by October 1st, so just a few days away. They have to report on actual performance for the first 4-year period, 2018 through 2021, and they have to develop and adopt new targets for 2022 through 2025, and also report on those to federal highway agencies, to Federal Highway Administration. So they're very busy working on those. We did have to do the CMAQ targets, which we adopted back in the June-July period, but most of our information doesn't go to federal agencies directly. It just goes to the state DOTs for information. Though sometime next year, we will be having a federal reviewers coming in to do our certification review, and they will want to look at this information. As background, some 2021 data is still pending. We don't have some of the most recent data yet. There is a time lag in collecting all this information. Refers back to our earlier discussion about the greenhouse gases. Sometimes there's just a time lag in getting data. The federal agencies do evaluate performance versus targets based on the latest information available. So if you don't have 2021 data, they'll look at 2020 and determine whether or not you met your target, even though you may have set a target for 2021, just as background. MPOs normally have up to 180 days afterwards to set targets, so we could be bringing those to you in December or January, but we do have that federal certification review coming up. And finally, there are no consequences for MPOs for either achieving or not achieving targets. Again, we're simply reporting and conducting this process to improve transparency and accountability. So I want you to bear that in mind as I go through a lot of detail in the next couple slides. So next slide, please. So we've been working on these PPP requirements with the 3 DOTs, District DOT, Maryland DOT, Virginia DOT, validating recent data. Do they see what we see? And sometimes there is a difference. And then discussing the methodology for forecasting future performance and developing the new targets. So again, I'm going to present to you in 2 areas, the highway asset, pavement, bridge condition, and on the highway system performance, travel time, reliability measures. So there's 9 targets here. Again, we are looking forward to having you adopt these 2022-2025 targets next month. And we also have to write up some reports on performance, provide them to the DOTs for the last 4 years. And again, we want to update the appendix that went into our long-range plan just a few months ago, because we want to include all this information before the federal agencies, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, come in and review us early next year. Next slide, please. So here is the highway asset group of 6 measures. Reading the first column, there are 2 about interstate pavement. Generally, you can think of this as like a report card. Pavement is either good, which is like an A on your report card. Then pavement can be fair, and most pavement is actually fair condition, which is like a B or a C. And then interstate and poor condition is a D or F. The performance targets only are looking at good condition or A, or poor condition D and F. We do not set a target for fair, but again, most or half at least of pavement is generally in that grouping. We do the same thing for the rest of the NHS, the non-highway system. So this is your major arteries, parkways, other significant roads in the region that are on what is defined as the NHS by the 3 DOTs in coordination with Federal Highway. Again, percent of pavement that's in good condition, percent of pavement in poor condition. And again, we want to be exceeding our target in good condition, and we want to be below our target in poor condition. We like to be better than good, and we want to minimize the poor as much as possible. And finally, bridges, percentage of bridges, and this looks at deck area, so it's not just lane miles, in good condition and poor condition. So the first column of numbers is the targets that were adopted back in July 2018, so just over 4 years ago. And these are the targets that were developed. And again, for our region, we are taking what the DOTs have done and putting it together. TPB staff are not applying any margin or direction to these targets. Again, this is basically a regional compilation of what the 3 DOTs think or predict will happen in our region. The next column, you can see actual performance. And again, we don't have the 2021 data yet for the pavements, though we're actively working on it right now. But based on the 2020 information, we would not have met our target for the interstate system pavement in good condition, but we would easily have made it for no more than 1.7% being in poor condition. Actual performance was just 0.2%, so green check mark there. NHS, same thing. We would not have made achieved our 4-year target for good pavement. So maybe the 2021 data will change, but I expect not. We easily met the target for poor condition. Bridges, we do have 2021 data available that's collected a little on different time scale, and we easily met our targets for percentage of bridges in good condition, exceeded it by 10%, and came in below, which is good, came in below our target in poor condition. So next slide, please. And again, more information about this was provided to the technical committee of staff. There's reports. We briefed them back in March and April. So if you have more detailed questions, there's also some slides at the end. But I'm trying to keep this pretty high level for you. So in developing the highway assets, we're using the same general methodology we used in 2018. We take what the DOTs predict. That means all of what district DOT predicts for pavement and bridges. The Maryland has a forecast for the 4 Maryland counties because they do things at that level. Virginia's models are set up for a statewide forecast, so we take that statewide forecast and apply conditions in our TPB area. So again, we know what pavement and bridge condition is in our area, then we take their forecasts and extrapolate into the future. As for your information in general, the DOTs are planning for slowly degrading asset condition based on some of these measures. There's a decreased focus on keeping the interstate in good condition. Just keeping it fair is important enough. It takes up a lot of resources. There is an increased focus on the rest of the NHS and on other state maintained roads. In Virginia, especially, VDOT maintains a lot of roads even beyond just the national highway system. They're putting more resources into that. State DOTs continue to state they have constrained budgets versus increased costs for material and inflation. So there's a limit to what can be done. Though the IAJ Act has increased federal funds, remember that federal funds only make up about 15% of our transportation funding in our region. So even if federal funds go up a few percent in the big picture, that isn't much. Just as background, overall, about 10% of our funding in the region is going to keeping highway assets in good condition. That's about $800 million a year for a big picture. IAJA did bring in more discretionary grants. It's great if you get a discretionary grant. Conti already covered some of the grant endorsement letters earlier today, but you can't really plan for something you may not get, which adds to a little uncertainty in planning. So the states have built in, I think, some safety margins in the targets they're setting. Next slide, please. So here's the first slide, first performance measure, interstate pavement performance versus good. Blue is the actual performance. There's some data issues in 2017, so we don't have that. But you can see up through 2020, we were at 49.4%. So almost half of the interstate was in good condition. That's like an A condition. States, or for our region, we did have a 52.7% goal, though. By 2021, we're probably, as I mentioned earlier, not going to meet that goal. So working with the DOTs, the forecast they have for 2023, 2025 are a bit lower even than actual 2020 conditions, come up with a 44.8% target for 2025, our 4-year target. Again, this is all based on aggregating state information. Next slide, please. So here's poor condition. Again, in this case, we want performance to be below our target so that we can achieve it. Target in 2021 was 1.7%. The states are predicting 1.6% for our region in 2025. Again, actual performance has been just a couple tenths of a percent. Next slide, please. So here's the rest of the national highway system. Again, your major arteries. Actual good has been about 26% the last couple of years. but states predicted higher in 2019, did not achieve this target, probably not going to achieve it for 2021. Based on late performance, again, we would not have achieved it. So I think state expectations have been framed downwards a little bit. Combining the state totals for a region, we come up with 26.3% for 2025 as our new target. Next slide, please. Again, poor, similar story, about 4% of pavement in good condition. Adding together the states, we come up with 7.2% for our region as a target for 2025. Should be able to make it. I think states are building in a little safety margin here. There are some implications for them in terms of federal funding if they don't meet their targets, where they have to redirect some of their pavement funds and so forth. So a little safety margin. Next slide, please. Now we're on to bridges. Bridges were kind of static for a long time. Lots of bridges in this region are good, but bridges are aging out. Arlington Memorial Bridge has been repaired. South Capitol Street Bridge in the district has been rebuilt, but we've got weight limits on the TR Bridge. Other bridges are aging out. And remember that the DOTs don't own all the bridges. In some cases, they're owned by agencies like the National Park Service. And of course, in this case, a bridge is not just going over a river, it's any aerial structure. So overpasses, interchanges. The Springfield interchange has something like 49 different bridges as part of it. So any aerial structure. So good conditions have actually been going down the last couple of years, might be impacted somewhat by the pandemic as well. Putting together the state's forecast, we've come up with 25.7% for a 4-year target. Next slide, please. And here's poor, again, a bit more of a margin, come up with a 4.2% target. Next slide, please. So here are the 6 targets we're proposing for the 2022-2025 period. Again, the DOTs are just really finalizing some of their targets. Virginia had some more visible process. All of these targets for the state go through their Commonwealth Transportation Board, but Maryland district, these targets are approved by the secretary. So it's whatever final tweaks may be made before the secretary signs off on them, expecting to get the final targets any day now, but there may be some very slight tweaks before you see these for final approval next month. Next slide, please. So onto the other area, travel time reliability. Next slide, please. 3 performance measures in this area: travel time reliability on the interstate, travel time reliability on the non-interstate, and then truck travel time reliability index. This last one being a ratio, it's kind of hard to intuitively understand. Performance in 2020, 2021, I think everybody can understand, been significantly impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Travel, actually, from a user's perspective, travel's been a lot more reliable the last couple of years because there's been fewer people on the roads, fewer rush hours, more people telework. So based on actual performance, the feds aren't having us make any changes. We easily met the goals that were set back in 2018 for these 2 performance measures. Truck travel time is a different story. 2 things at work. Once, if you go look at monthly data, truck traffic obviously fell way off in March and April of 2020, but then bounced back really quickly. We all need food. We all need our groceries. We need everything else that's being shipped to us. So all the trucks got back on the road. This was also a fairly new measure. So I think states were a little too aspirational, optimistic of what was going to happen. But as a result, we did not meet our goal in this target. So next slide, please. So similar methodology, what we do is we average observed trends the last couple of years and near-term predictions of the travel demand model. That way we capture recent influences as well as population changes, changes in the road network, and so forth. But we decided to exclude data from the pandemic years and extrapolate from 2019 forward. So that the green bars you're going to see are extrapolations from 2019. I will say that both recent trends and the travel demand model projects small reductions in congestion, which will lead to slight improvements in travel reliability. Some road projects are being completed. There's also more technology out there. People can choose better routing of their system. But what's going to actually happen in terms of rush hour traffic and teleworking, I think everybody's gazing into the crystal ball. So this is just an extrapolation from the past. What's actually going to happen is probably going to be different. Next slide, please. So again, blue bars are what actually happened. You can see what happened in the pandemic, but this reliability measure tends to be pretty stable, 58.2, 58.1%. So if extrapolated from 2019, we're expecting a very slight improvement gives us a target of 61.1% in 2025. Again, we'll see what happens. Next slide, please. On the rest of the NHS, again, actual conditions were much better than predicted in 2020, 2021. Easily exceeded the 2021 target we had of 72.7%, and even would have in previous years. So a slightly more ambitious target for our predictions 2020 through 2025, leading up to 78.6% reliable travel. And again, if you want more details about the limits and the parameters that go into this, there's a slide at the back or, of course, much more information available online or in reports. And next slide, please. So trucks, an index, if truck travel was perfectly reliable, your index would be like 1.0. So you want that index to be going down. Data was a bit off maybe in 2015, 2016, but we really dropped in 2017, 2018, 2019. Again, we didn't have the data when we were setting targets back in 2018. So we did not meet our target of 2.12 for 2021. So we've gone back projected from 2019 forward. And again, shows a slight improvement, index dropping down to 2.56 by 2025. Next slide, please. So these would be our proposed 4-year targets. Next slide, please. So a lot of information, tried to present it as concisely as possible. Thank you for your time. Again, we'll take any comments. We are getting some final data and information from the states. In just the next few days, we're going to have snapshots that show conditions for each jurisdiction. So you can see where, for instance, Fairfax County, what conditions are in your county as opposed to the region as a whole. And we're also working on a GIS map so you could zoom in on the area where you live or a downtown region or something you're interested in and see where good and poor pavement is or where good and poor bridges are. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation, Chair, and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate this. Guys, so we're running about 15 minutes behind. So instead of taking questions, what I'm going to ask is that anyone put their questions in the chat and the staff will get back to you with those answers. Since these are informational items, I want to get through them. So if you'll just put your questions in the chat, the staff will get back to you. So with that, the next topic is something that is of interest to all of us as well, something that the TPB has been working on for several years. We even established a new grant program to help improve the safety outcomes on our region's roadways. Today, we have a guest speaker from the Federal Highway Administration, their senior safety engineer, David Petrucci, who will brief us a new comprehensive approach to roadway safety, one that addressed roadway user, roadway design, operations, and all holistically. David, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. I hope all is well, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with all of you. My name again is Dave Petrucci. I'm a senior safety engineer with the Federal Highway Administration Resource Center, and I'm here today to talk about the safe system approach. And I believe we have some slides that should be shared, and I hope my audio is coming through loud and clear. Excellent, very good. So let's move on. If you wouldn't mind bringing up the PDF slide deck, we'll then begin the presentation. So what is the safe system approach? What on earth am I talking about with all of you today? Well, the safe system approach is a change. It's a change from how we've traditionally or conventionally approached safety because people make mistakes and humans are vulnerable to those mistakes on our transportation system. So designing a highway, designing a roadway, designing a system with many redundancies in place can help to improve safety and protect all users. So my remarks here today are hoping to kind of capture the US DOT's National Road Safety Strategy, Roadway Safety Strategy, excuse me, and a lot of our work within the department and across Federal Highway within our safety programs that are working to help realize a future where we see zero fatalities and serious injuries on our nation's surface transportation system. Next slide, please. So I'd like to begin my remarks with this. While zero then would be our goal, a safe system approach is how we would get there, and this is how we would get there together. Next slide, please. So I'd like to begin my remarks here with a question. If we were to reflect on this question, why are we losing so many of our loved ones, our neighbors, and our coworkers? And why are we seeing so many fatalities and serious injuries on our nation's roadways? Well, in our industry, we could begin paring down and understanding some of these numbers and the trends. We could talk about impairment and speed and distraction. And well, maybe this challenge or this question would best be answered by appreciating the type of road user or the experience of the road user or the roadway environment that's been constructed and maintained. Perhaps users are less experienced or might be older and more susceptible to injury. Well, these could be ways in our industry we begin taking a harder look at some of the data, but I believe that we could begin answering this question by simply stating that people are killed and seriously injured on our nation's roadways when the forces involved in a collision that are then transferred onto the human body end up exceeding tolerable thresholds. Next slide, please. So in this spirit, I believe that we're, with the safe system approach, entertaining a paradigm shift where we are changing our overall approach. And this quote brought to us by Robertson et al. Back in the early 1990s is that in road injury epidemiology, kinetic energy could be the pathogen. And as a traffic engineer, that's a calculation that I reflect on often, and one that perhaps traditionally hadn't been made in a lot of our traffic studies or design projects, but one that really is at the heart of a lot of what we do. So next slide, please. The new direction that I'm speaking to you all about here today really aims at eliminating fatal and serious injuries for all road users by accommodating the fact that people, human beings, make mistakes and keeping impacts when they occur on the human body at some tolerable level. This is really the fundamental objective of the safe system approach. This is what separates the safe system approach from what we've traditionally done in safety. And it really is, I think, representing an ethical imperative that not even one death is acceptable on our roadway system. So we're talking about accommodating human failure. And when failure occurs, or when a mistake occurs, those impacts being at tolerable levels. Next slide, please. So how do we define the safe system approach? It's not super easy to define, but we do say that the safe system approach is proactive. The safe system approach represents a moral and/or ethical imperative for society to rally behind this call for zero. It's an approach that's built on the management of kinetic energy or the transfer thereof. It is human focused, embraces best practices, embraces proactivity, and is a rather paradigm shift like change or approach in our profession that asks us to look at system level needs and also individual project decisions altogether. So next slide, please. The safe system approach really isn't, though, a new concept. It's existed for, I think, better than 30 years in other countries. You can see we have some of those flags here shown on this slide. And these nations are really early adopters of the safe system approach, where we've seen marked decreases in traffic fatalities on their systems. Each of these nations with at least a 50% reduction in their roadway fatalities. And really, I would say if you look at these time periods, the mid 90s to 2015 or so, this was a time period where in the US, we saw perhaps only an 11% reduction in fatalities by comparison. So the safe system approach is really how these countries moved off the plateau of safety, starting to achieve significant reductions. So these nations, I think, are showing to us some promise that implementing a safe system approach here in the States, we might be able to realize meaningful reductions in fatalities. So next slide, please. So our safe system approach has an infographic, and we begin speaking about it using this graphic. So this is attempting to describe what we mean. There are key components here to understand that I'd like to emphasize. We have an approach that's built around a circle of building block elements. And capturing the approach around the perimeter, we have principles. And that's what I'll describe here in a moment. If you would mind, next slide. So around the perimeter of this graphic, we see our 6 safe system principles. They're shown here on the outside of the ring, and they are: redundancy is crucial, death and serious injury are unacceptable, humans make mistakes, humans are vulnerable to mistakes, responsibility, using, operating, designing our system is shared, and safety is proactive. Next slide, please. So those are our beliefs. But in order to realize those beliefs or those principles, we have some building block elements highlighted here in the middle of this graphic. And these are really the conduits through which the safe system approach can be implemented. The key focus of the SSA, the safe system approach, is to reduce death and serious injury by accommodating human mistakes, etc. We're talking about making a commitment in each of these areas: safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. Next slide, please. So in summary, here are our 6 safe system principles. These again are the fundamental beliefs upon which the approach is built. They establish the goal of the safe system approach, acknowledging human limitation and setting expectations for how we in the profession and more broadly in society would choose to act. And I can explain a few of these one by one as we get into the next parts of the presentation. Next slide, please. And on this next slide, we show again the 5 safe system elements. These are the unique building blocks or conduits, a few different ways you could describe this, through which we would realize the safe system approach. These are, again, built on some of our experiences on the framework developed by other early safe system adopters, including Sweden, the Netherlands, Australia, and New Zealand. All the while, I think it's important to emphasize that the safe system approach might be a new term that we're using here in the States, but it's not new globally, and it's not asking us to abandon or to, in some way, walk away from our traditional E's. If you'll recall, in our profession, we talk about the 4 E's at least: enforcement, education, emergency response, and engineering, in addition to others. Those 4 E's are refocused perhaps into these different elements where we take a fresh look at how to reduce death and serious injury. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we're talking about a paradigm shift. That I think that's fair. One that accepts the fact that as road users, people will make mistakes, and unfortunately, those mistakes will lead to crashes. And unfortunately, many of those crashes can end up being more severe. This is an approach, I think, that asks us to take a long, hard look at how humans interact with the built environment, and asking system owners and operators to strive in every way possible to make it easy or easier for humans not to make mistakes in their interaction with the built environment by designing roads and vehicles to be in tune with human competencies. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that one of our key building blocks here, one of our beliefs, is that redundancy is crucial. What do I mean by that? Well, we have a nice graphic here that attempts to describe what we're getting at. We have a graphic on the left-hand side that shows a Swiss cheese model, and then we have another on the right-hand side. On the left, you can see how the 5 safe system elements are working together. They're working together to prevent failure. And a failure within our system occurs when all of these layers, all of these elements allow a mistake to pass through and then become an injury, become a fatality. So we see on the left-hand side that while maybe a mistake exceeds 3 of the layers of our system, there's a layer that helps capture that human mistake. And on the right-hand side, we show that a failure really only results when there's a hole, a weakness, however you like to describe it, in each slice or each element of the system. And those mistakes or those holes line up just right for that particular mistake, and momentarily and unfortunately, if that occurs, we would end up watching a failure happen. The basic principle is that lapses and weaknesses really in one part of the system can occur, but other parts would compensate and maybe not allow that to occur. So we say that redundancy is crucial because it's not just us in the road construction, the road safety business. Safe users have a role to play, post crash care, operating at safe speeds, safe vehicles. We all have a role to play here and supporting each of the layers of the approach. Next slide, please. So if we were to attempt to describe what we mean here about a transition, a journey, when going from what we've traditionally done perhaps in the business to one that's inspired by and based on the safe system approach. Perhaps traditionally we have focused on preventing crashes, and in a safe system approach, we accept that crashes are going to occur because mistakes will occur. However, our focus is on prevention of death and serious injury. Traditionally, perhaps we've focused on improving, correcting, changing human behavior. And in a safe system approach, perhaps our focus is really designing for and anticipating said human mistake and the limitations that the human interaction brings. So we also focus on reductions in kinetic energy and not just controlling speed. And at times, perhaps we've viewed crashes as the result of an individual's poor choice or a mistake, and the preponderance of crashes being based on an individual making a mistake. But an individual is making a mistake using our system, uh, and interacting with all parts of that system. So in a safe system approach, we're talking about shared responsibility. And instead of reacting on past issues and maybe perhaps reacting on past crash history, with a safe system approach, we're talking about proactively identifying safety performance challenges, identifying these locations, addressing known risks, and getting in front of many of the challenges that we face. Next slide, please. So what do we do next? And this is a great question to leave you with, one that perhaps we don't have a terrific answer for, because there really is no single way that we'll end up realizing a safe system approach. There isn't a flip that an agency can switch. There isn't a change in a publication that an agency or organization could consider that automatically creates a safe system. Instead, this is a process at best learned by doing that represents a journey where we'll be presented with opportunities and challenges along the way. And really, I think if we look back on some of the pioneering countries that led the way in the safe system approach, their journeys were shaped by their own cultural, temporal, and local contexts, but they were guided by these underlying principles. So we all may be different, but if we embrace these underlying principles, I think that we'll realize that we have a lot more in common than what separates us, perhaps. So next slide, please. With that, I wanted to mention that Federal Highway has been hard at work, along with many of our other modal partners in the United States Department of Transportation, in safety, but more specifically on implementation of the safe system approach. We have some materials available on one of the websites that our Office of Safety maintains. That URL is there. So we are busy helping to develop resources and update resources to assist in this journey. Next slide, please. In fact, if you were to grab one of your smartphones or your devices and take a picture of that QR code, I believe that should work. That should get you to a link where we have some available resources, specifically shown here on this slide, including a safe system strategic plan that Federal Highway worked on with Road to Zero and the Institute of Transportation Engineers, in addition to several others, including a newer resource on a safe system framework and analytical methodology for assessing intersections and intersection projects. And so with that, I wanted to leave you. I believe you have this material in your read ahead. And also, I'll leave you with some of these URLs. And I think we now switch to the next slide. And I would like to thank you for your time, and I think we're planning to hold some of our questions and put those into the chat. So again, on behalf of Federal Highway, my colleagues, and the U.S. Department of Transportation, we appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, David. This board talks a lot about roadway safety, and so I know that's important to everyone. So because it is one, 1:45, 1:50, and I'm not sure we have enough time to get through the next presentation. Since we do have David, does anyone want to actually ask him a question versus putting your comment in the chats? Okay. So Patrick, go ahead.
Thank you for this presentation. It's an important issue. And my question, I guess I'll make this brief since we don't have a lot of time, but can you just talk about, when you talk about safe roads, I think my concern is that the safest road oftentimes for a bicyclist or pedestrian isn't a road at all, but it's separated infrastructure, trails, and I think keeping the focus on roadways is concerning to me in that roads are typically built for cars, and then bicyclists and pedestrians are considered as an afterthought. So can you just talk about how you see the role of infrastructure like trails, like off-road infrastructure, fitting into this overall scheme?
Sure, I appreciate that. Thank you for the question. I'd like to think that what we mean by safe roads as an element of the approach would be the roadway environment, the not just the cross section of the highway, the roadway, the street, but actually the environment in which users are operating and making decisions. So I believe that it is intended to go beyond just the cartway of a street. We are talking about the physical infrastructure that exists to support multiple user types and modes of travel. So I think that is the intent. Safe roads being the label or the element title that we're working from right now. I understand how that might be somewhat concerning or confusing, but we are talking about the environment in which all users are operating.
Thank you. Casey?
Thank you so much. Really interesting presentation. And my question actually builds a little bit on the previous question, and wondering how much you consider kind of larger systemic things such as land use, locating people close to a grocery store so they don't have to drive, as well as transit access. Thinking about safe vehicles, oftentimes using a transit vehicle is much safer than driving your own car in terms of the likelihood of being in a crash. Are those things that you're also taking into consideration and building into this approach?
I think so. One of the technical avenues, no pun intended, that we could really consider is the management of conflicts. We have conflicts along our roadways, our streets, our freeways, and those conflicts are among various user groups. They exist because of various reasons, including access and land development. Sure, we know that a lot of demand and exposure placed on our system is occurring because of changes in land development, and I'd offer that we are aware and thinking of what you've described here as an important part of the approach. I think we're probably staying at the approach level at this point and maybe not discussing specific strategies and solutions, but in an exercise to manage conflicts, where they occur, how they occur, what those conflicts look like, the safe system approach is really compelling us to consider them in the design of our projects and the management of the systems that we're responsible for.
In the chat, Neil Harris asks, is this approach different from Vision Zero? Could you answer that, Dave?
Oh boy, I would say that if we're saying Vision Zero together and the safe system approach together during the same event, those are two very good things. So I don't believe that they're exclusive. And no, the safe system approach might be really the way that we would like to see reaching that ultimate goal, that vision of zero injuries and fatalities on our nation's surface transportation system. So that might be the vision. The approach would perhaps be the way in which we could get there.
Rodney Roberts.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Sorry about before, you know, when you put that document up, it wiped out all my stuff and I couldn't get it back. So I was lost. But anyway, the reason I put my hand up this time is, you know, I keep on hearing this, you know, during the whole presentation, I keep hearing this, you know, people are making mistakes. It's a mistake, a mistake, a mistake. Well, when people are going down, you know, in a 55-mile-per-hour zone doing 80 miles an hour, that's not a mistake. You know, most of the stuff that's going on out there, you know, people speeding and all that is not a mistake. You know, I mean, they're doing this on purpose. So I think into your, you know, into your process here or your plan, I think you have to look at, you know, having some better enforcement of the traffic laws. Because, you know, I ride a motorcycle and I have been almost killed, you know, at least a dozen times in the past year. I mean, it's just unbelievable the stuff that people are doing out there. You have these cars on the road that have like 700 or 800 horsepower that can do, you know, 100 miles an hour in about 3 seconds. And, you know, it's just, it's craziness. And, you know, this, I like, you know, yeah, this must be a nice approach, but it's not a nice issue. And unless you look at it really seriously, I'm afraid this process is doomed. I hate to say it because people are just out of control and there's no one out there to keep them in control. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so that I don't see any other hands up. I want to thank David again for all this information. I found it very informative as well. So because we have run out of time, we will either next month or November, Conti assures me that we will get the briefing on the 2022 state of the commute survey. I apologize, Nick, that we didn't get to your presentation today because I know from the steering committee that's very interesting, and I think everyone here is going to find it interesting when you get to share that with us. So I apologize for not getting to that today. Again, as always, if there's questions on any of the presentations we did have, please put them in the chat and the staff will definitely get back to you. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting and remind everyone that our next meeting is scheduled as primarily in person there at COG on October the 19th. And I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
The polling worked. Yay.
Yeah, it was great. I think the polling worked really well. We'll have to keep that in mind for other meetings.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Pam.